Draven is the definition of high risk, high reward. Draven as a champion is essentially equivalent to early game domination because his power in lane is just absurd. However, a Draven player who fails to take advantage of the champion's power curve will not have a good time. Draven falls off late game rather hard, so you have to find those openings and playmaking situations during the lane phase if you want Draven to function. But Draven's power curve might be one of his biggest assets right now. Especially in the current meta with the new bot lane gank paths, Draven can truly shine. A Draven lane is inherently very tempting for both junglers to camp, since the enemy will want to take your passive stacks away, while your own team wants to enable you to cash them in. And those new bot lane gank opportunities we now have add further to the chaos, yet chaotic early game all-ins are exactly what Draven needs. Baiting the enemy to then pull the trigger at the right time is all it takes to get the snowball rolling with Draven's passive gold generation, so you can then run away with the game due to your item advantage. This allows Draven to ultimately end the game way before the enemy can find their footing or even think about abusing Draven's bad late game. And this is easier for Draven than ever before, not only because of the jungle changes, but also because the removal of mythic items makes itemization much easier and simpler for you. In this video, I'll give you the best runes and items used by high elo players to great success, but then also show you how Draven needs to be played at every stage of the game so you can win more games with Draven yourself. However, while videos like this certainly help, the best thing you can get to improve your win rate is a personal coach. And this is where my sponsors from Solo Queue Solution come in. I think they have the best coaching program on the market, which is why I chose them for my partner. When you book their coaching program, a challenger coach will work with you in one-on-one sessions, which makes for rapid improvements. Their hand-tailored, individualized lesson plans are so effective and consistent that the company's Solo Queue solution even provides a full refund should you not reach Diamond despite taking the full course. Naturally, this is tied to conditions such as actually attending all the lessons with your challenger coach and playing at least 15 hours of solo queue per week, etc. So as you can already see, this is only for the truly dedicated solo queue enjoyers among you, but if you are determined to make Season 14 your best season ever, you will find everything you need in the description. With that being said, the optimal Draven rune page for your solo queue games is Lethal Tempo, Triumph, Legend Alacrity, and Last Stand with Eyeball Collection and Treasure Hunter secondary. Especially after all the other keystones got nerfed, Lethal Tempo is the best choice for Draven. As you will see, a lot of your items revolve around crit, and crit with attack speed is very synergistic because the more you attack, the more you have the chance to actually land a critical strike. Also, this rune is just superb in early game skirmishes and also in late game teamfights if you get into position, because the more you can auto-attack, the more you can make use of your items naturally. And even in the early game where you don't have many items yet, a lot of power comes from your Q, your axes, so kiting with attack speed and the additional range eventually does go a long way too. In the next slot, the best rune to make use of Draven's early game is Triumph. Draven wants to go all in whenever possible, and Triumph enables you to actually keep fighting once you get that first takedown. Some people pick Presence of Mind for more consistent access to Draven's axes, but Triumph is just the best snowballing rune, also coming with some additional gold for what it's worth, so this should be the default choice. Again, Draven is all about the early game, and so should be Draven's rune page, so the choice in the next row is Legend Alacrity, because it's the most aggressive early game rune you can get here. Its value is front-loaded, which means you get its full benefit very early on, and the extra attack speed is invaluable in early game fights. Most fights at that stage of the game end with one player dying and the other player surviving with just one slither of health left, one auto-attack worth of damage. Alacrity can make the difference. Again, Draven always runs forward when a fight is happening, and I know I said in another video that Last Stand would only be used by Karthus and Samira, but Draven is actually also one of the top tier users of the rune. So this will be a bigger damage increase than Coup de Grace even in the early game, or especially in the early game I should rather say. Now with the lead you generate, you also want to snowball as hard as possible, so Eyeball Collection and Treasure Hunter allow you to do exactly that. They are the two strongest snowballing runes in the game, so they are an easy inclusion. In any case, while the rune page is nothing new exactly, here's the new item build which takes perfect advantage of the removal of mythic items. You start with the Doran's Blade of course, but for your first component you get a Serrated Dirk. Lethality is stronger than it has ever been this season, and Serrated Dirk is the most efficient lethality component. However, you don't upgrade it right away, which you do not have to because full items hold less value when you don't need to trigger mythic passives. You just sit on Serrated Dirk and finish your Infinity Edge next, ideally getting the BF sword first. All this raw attack damage works perfectly with the attack speed from your rune page and the bonus damage from your Q. It makes for the most aggressive early game, also setting you up for a decent late game build should it come to that. After finishing Infinity Edge, you then upgrade Dirk to Collector and finish your Berserker's Greaves. This should be your core build pretty much every single game. The next two item choices are also pretty straightforward, going for Shield Bow and then Lord Dominic's Regards or Mortal Reminder depending on the matchup, or the other way around. It is possible to get the Last Whisper item before Shield Bow should the matchup call for it. Now should the game still continue at this point, well, I'm sorry for you, but your last options are then Bloodthirster, Guardian Angel or Morph Malmocious in most cases, or sometimes even Kaenic Rukkan if the enemy has really strong AP. However, as you will see, you're doing yourself a favor if you can finish the game way before that, so let's go into the analysis so you can see for yourselves. So Draven is an absolute monster in lane. He can walk all over poor or bad lane champions like Sivir for example. Sivir late game hypercarry can outscale him, but in lane Draven would stomp her. However, you have to be careful against the stronger bot lane combos such as Misfortune Nautilus in this case. You gotta play around the opposing engage cooldowns, because if you don't, you are very easy to catch. While they're up, you have to stay safe and farm. But the enemy must be careful too. They cannot approach without landing CC on you first. This rather interesting dynamic means that in low elo it will be a kill fest for the Draven player, but in high elo the enemy will hide under tower because they can't risk it, so you get priority and farm advantage. However, you have to care if the enemy jungle values bot ganks over void grabs, so make sure you got enough vision in the river. Anyway, you get lots of freedom in lane as a result of all of this, and with a lane priority you can go for jungle invades, establish more vision, maybe even catch an enemy out of position and then they have to run from you, so Draven does get a lot of mileage for his team due to his early game presence. So this essentially boils down to that Draven is relatively easy to play when the enemy makes mistakes, because then you get fed quite easily. But when the enemy are playing safe, you also have to play safe and stack your passive. Because if you don't play safe and you get ganked, you lose a ton of your passive stacks, which means your snowballing potential just goes down the drain. However, a Draven lane is very attractive for your jungler anyway, which means that sooner or later a fight will happen and your stacking your passive will pay off eventually. The early power of a Draven with Serrated Dirk is quite oppressive anyway, but when you even have numbers advantage on top, it's just no chance for the enemy. And of course, once you get that first fat paycheck, Dirk plus IE attack damage components turn even, well, iffy looking fights heavily in your favor. But this is just the beauty of Draven. Once that snowball starts rolling, it is almost impossible to stop it. The enemy bot laners will be out of any options at this point, because even if their jungler comes, all their risk is that Draven just kills all of them, and it will essentially be a huge waste of resources for the enemy team because the jungler is not helping elsewhere, while they get Draven even more fed because of their carelessness. So when the early game goes according to plan, everything that follows will be easy as well as a result, because you're just so far ahead. You control all the objectives on the map, collect even more kills as you go around the map, because you will be strong even when compared to solo laners, which then allows your entire team to start snowballing, enabling you to close out the game fast with your massive advantage. But what happens if you make a mistake along the way? I mean, one careless decision and the enemy AD carry just kills you right back, and one moment later even collects another massive shutdown after an unlucky fight. Then suddenly team fights, the mid and late game in general, with Draven can become very hard. It is true that this champion falls off later on, unlike a hypercarry who always has that late game insurance, so a mistake like that can just lose you the game on the spot and there's nothing you can do to recover from it. In such a case, there's no denying it, you need to have a solid team to still come back, and your job then is to follow up on your allies' plays with Draven's strong single target DPS. You have to stick with your team, hope your axes are ready and hope that your follow-up damage is enough to actually matter, because Draven doesn't provide much else. The problem during the team fighting stage, however, is that Draven loses axes when not fighting next to minions or monsters. During lane you can keep your axes ready at all times, but during team fights you can't really choose where and when to fight, so in the worst case scenario when the enemy has the priority and can make the shot calls, you can't do much to salvage this problem. Luckily for you though, important teamfights usually happen near objectives, which will always have an opportunity for you to get your axes ready beforehand. As you can see, when you're behind you need both, a team that can pull its weight and also opportunities to apply your single target DPS. In big teamfights where AoE damage would be better and where you have to kite constantly so you can't always keep track of your axes, Draven can really suffer. Again, an early lead is mandatory to avoid being in a situation like this in the first place. But yeah, the truth is that if you fail during the early game, you lose all of Draven's solo carry potential, but it is entirely in your hands, you just need to be skillful enough. But if you want to learn a champion that is equally flashy but with less pressure on you to perform, you can watch my Samira guide by clicking the link on your screen.